Do you have a friend or loved one that kind of likes metal, but not those screaming bands? Or are you a person that likes heavy riffs, but you have a hard time with bands that don't sing? I'm here to help. Welcome, metalheads. I'm the host of Heavy Metal Philosophy and writer for Metal Digest, John Barbas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for this week's Riff of the Week. When it comes to extreme metal like death metal or black metal, well, I just think that a lot of people, if not most people, just don't have it in them to ever like that kind of music. But for those of us that do have it in us, it can often be an acquired taste that we develop over time. Like a lot of people, I began my metal journey with Metallica. When I first heard the song One and subsequently explored And Justice for All, I was immediately hooked. From that point on, I was a metalhead, and I searched out other thrash bands like Megadeth, and then other similar bands like Machine Head. But I didn't jump right away into Cannibal Corpse or Hooded Menace. At that point in time in my life, that leap would have been way too big. I needed gateway bands. I got into Cannibal Corpse and Bolt Thrower and Behemoth through gateway bands. So here's my top 5 recommended gateway bands to get you from a regular metalhead into extreme metal. Number 5, Opeth. Now, first of all, let me just say, Opeth isn't going to be for everyone. The next 4 bands on the list will be for everyone. They are what would be more widely considered gateway bands. But if you're a music nerd or the loved one you're trying to convert is a music nerd, then I have to recommend Opeth, because Opeth was a big gateway band for me because I'm a music nerd. Like I said, they're not for everybody. They're very progressive. They have long songs with complex arrangements. They don't do that typical verse, chorus sort of song structure. And they don't have these catchy choruses. So it's not going to hook in your typical fan. But like I said, if you're a music nerd, if you are thrilled by complex music, then Opeth is the perfect band to get you from there to extreme metal. Most of you watching this, I won't have to tell you who Opeth are, but for those of you unfamiliar, they're a Swedish progressive metal band. They're known for blending death metal with prog rock and acoustic folk. There's jazz going on here. You really can't ever predict what they're going to do next. I've already done an entire episode on how important the album Blackwater Park was to me in my development. It was a huge gateway album for me. I was drawn to the music. Like I said, it's so complex and beautiful, and I loved the clean singing on that album. And on the first few listens, I just kind of tolerated the growls to get to the music that I was so enthralled by. So I just kept coming back to that album and listening to it more and more, and eventually it became less of me tolerating the growls and me actually growing to appreciate them. And now that I appreciate the growls, I look for them and I love them. And once I got to that point, then I wanted to hear more albums by Opeth, and I became a mega fan. And then once I became a mega fan, that led me to discover one of Michael's side projects at the time, Bloodbath. As a gateway album, I highly recommend Blackwater Park by Opeth. Check out the songs Bleak or The Drapery Falls. That's a huge one. Now let's talk about number 4. Number 4. Killswitch Engage. When I was a young metalhead, I wanted more. I wanted more bands as heavy or maybe even heavier than Metallica. And while at that point in time in my life, I may not have been ready for bands like Immolation or Dying Fetus, I did absolutely love Killswitch Engage. If you're an absolute normie, then maybe I have to tell you who Killswitch Engage is. But I think everybody knows who Killswitch Engage is. An American metalcore band that seamlessly blends melodic death metal with hardcore. But they're more than that genre description. They're excellent. The catchy melodies, the brutal breakdowns, the emotionally charged lyrics. They were perfect for a metalhead like me at the time. They weren't singing about, Cthulhu or axe murderers. This was perfect for somebody in their young 20s who wanted something a little bit deeper, who wanted an emotional connection. And then on top of that, the music was so top tier, so elite. The grooves were so disgusting. You absolutely cannot listen to that early Killswitch Engage without moving your body. And then you have these soaring choruses with these melodies that just hook you in. Absolutely perfect gateway band. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to what I'm about to say, and it might make them a lot of people's number one gateway band. But every relationship I've ever been in, I've been the one that listens to the heaviest music. And Killswitch Engage was almost always a great compromise band that we could both listen to on road trips. So for Killswitch Engage, I'm going to recommend the album Alive or Just Breathing, and tracks like My Serenade and Fixation on the Darkness. Can't go wrong there. Now let's talk about number 3. Number 3, Slipknot. Slipknot might be the next Metallica. And I don't mean in sound, obviously not. I mean they're the big band in metal now, the way that Metallica was and is. Slipknot brought in a whole generation of kids into metal. They are the kind of band that leads kids to discover the predecessors. So for me, it was Metallica, and I discovered bands like Black Sabbath and Motorhead. And for kids of the Slipknot generation, they're going to look back and discover bands like Metallica and Sepultura. It's just one of those generational bands. Outside of a couple of bangers from Korn and Static X, the new metal era just didn't do it for me, and Slipknot was really the only band that came from that era that really grabbed a hold of me. If you saw my episode about rap metal, then you can probably guess how I feel about bands like Limp Bizkit, but I loved Slipknot back then because they were actually metal. You know, a lot of these new metal bands, they had distortion, and they could headbang because it got heavy at times, but I didn't really consider it metal. Slipknot actually had riffs and chops and attitude and substance. And you know, at the time, the masks and the image, it may have been meant initially to scare off the normies, which was cool, but now it's kind of sort of become a part of pop culture, and it's a little endearing. Great for a gateway band. I made a comparison to Metallica earlier, and here's another good one. Just like Metallica, almost everybody has at least one Slipknot song that they're into, and if you get into one of their bigger hits, then that will inevitably lead you to more of their heavy stuff, which makes them the perfect gateway band into extreme metal. I'm going to recommend their album Iowa, and the song The Heretic Anthem, which in my opinion is the perfect primer to get you into being a metalhead. It's heavy, it's catchy, and it's blasphemous. You know I'm gonna love it. Now let's talk about number 2. Spiritbox. Now let me clarify here. What I really mean is not necessarily that Spiritbox is the gateway band. What I mean is bands like Spiritbox are perfectly going to encapsulate my main point here. It's just that Courtney and the gang, they just embody what I'm about to say, because these newer bands, they don't really care as much about genre. They're not going to start the band and say, we're going to be thrash metal, or we're going to be death metal, or we're going to be power metal. They like all the genres, and they blend them together. And while some of the pop stuff that Spiritbox has done really isn't for a metalhead like me, it might be for you, and that might lead you to one of their absolute bangers like Holy Roller. I mean, for this one, I could have easily have picked Sleep Token or Ginger or Vexed or Bring Me the Horizon, We Came as Romans, Knocked Loose, Bad Omens. I could have picked 100 other new bands, but Spiritbox really embodies this genre mixing, and they're ultra heavy. Now, I have to admit, when newer metalcore bands started incorporating pop into their music, I hated it. I mean, I really still hate it. What Bring Me the Horizon has been doing doesn't do it for me. But for some reason, when Sleep Token or Spiritbox do it, it seems to fit better. As the metalcore genre gets more mature and the bands get more skilled, it seems like they're more able to mix the genres without it sounding forced. And these bands, it doesn't seem calculated. It doesn't seem like they're writing pop songs so that they can have big, successful careers. It seems like that's really the kind of music that they want to write. And when it feels more natural like that, it mixes better with the metal. It doesn't clash so much. And that's why I'm into these bands that might incorporate some of these mainstream elements and not these bands, because it seems like these bands are honest about it and these are just doing what they're supposed to. But regardless of my baggage and my hangups when it comes to pop music in my metal, that's what a good gateway band is supposed to be. They're supposed to bring you in with the hook and something nice and then scream in your face. I recommend Spiritbox's album Eternal Blue for the aforementioned crusher Holy Roller. But now let's talk about the number one gateway into extreme metal. Number one, Metalocalypse. Over and over again, pop culture has failed to portray metalheads and metal musicians without absolutely destroying the cringe meter. But Brendan Small's a real metalhead. He's not some suit that wanted to put out a show that's for what the new metal kids are into. He actually embodies it because he is it. He is authentic. And so therefore he was able to portray us accurately and roast us without being demeaning. Metalocalypse, the show, perfectly captures the absurdity of the various different metal cultures. And when I say absurd, I don't mean that in the dictionary sort of way. I mean that in the absurdism philosophical sort of way, in that Albert Camus or Kierkegaard sort of way. Because all of life is absurd. And we metalheads are keenly aware of how ridiculous and unfair life and society is. And therefore, we live our lives differently, or we express ourselves differently as a consequence, even if it's subconscious, even if we haven't read those books and put our finger on it and label it absurdism. We innately recognize that we don't belong in a world like this because it's dumb. Metalocalypse brilliantly expressed our metalhead quirks, and most of the laughs that came out of the comedy of that show was really it's funny because it's true sort of way, and all the rest was really just hyperbolic exaggerations, which is also very metal. As a young metalhead, and shortly after I discovered Opeth, I heard that they were going to make a show about metal, and James and Kirk from Metallica were going to be voices in this cartoon show about metal, and I, of course, just had to watch it. And it became my favorite show of all time. But also, during the comedy, the music made by this cartoon band Deathclock was also excellent because, as I said before, Brendan Small is a real metalhead, and he's an amazing guitar player and songwriter. And I gotta tell you, those first two Deathclock albums, Death Album 1 and 2, I unironically hold them as two of my favorite death metal albums of all time. I loved that show so much. I watched every single episode. I own all the seasons on DVD, and that was the first time that I heard death metal that was catchy. So after I got songs like Mermaider and Blood Reputed stuck in my head, I knew that there was death metal out there with hooks, and I wanted more of it, which led me to discover bands like Arch Enemy, bands like Amon Amarth, bands like In Flames or Carcass, and that led me down the road to more extreme metal. This cartoon that I loved watching so much was the final hammer that broke down the last barrier for me and extreme metal. And now, finally, after so many years, we're going to get the conclusion to the show. Just like the movie Serenity finally concluded the show Firefly, this movie, Army of the Doomstar, is going to conclude the story that was told in Metalocalypse before it was unceremoniously canceled. If you're a metalhead, or the person you're trying to convert is going to be a metalhead, I really don't see how they would be able to be a metalhead and not get this show. I mean, this show perfectly encapsulates us. It's one of the best gateways. It was my number one, and I can't wait for the movie. Now, before we conclude the episode, let's talk about the riff of the week, and I want to know what you think. Were these good picks for gateway bands? What were your gateway bands that got you into extreme metal? Were you ever successful in converting one of your friends or family or loved ones? I definitely want to know that story. Let me know in the comments or hit me up on social media. All of my links are in the description. We just jumped on Threads, y'all. Bandwagon time. Now let's do the riff of the week. And the riff of the week for me is going to be Dethklok's Mermaider. Of course, when I saw that first episode of Metalocalypse, of course I got a kick out of the Duncan Hills theme song, and it's heavy, and the theme song to the show is heavy, but Mermaider, that was the first one that, whoa, wow, that's a crushing riff. That's the one that made me want to buy Death Album 1. That's the one. I still hold that riff in high regard. But let me know what you think. What's your favorite Dethklok song? And if you want to catch another great episode of Heavy Metal Philosophy and you're on YouTube, just click this link right here. If you're audio only, no worries, links in the description. But most importantly, read philosophy, listen to metal. I love you.